The establishment backed Shontel Brown. She came on top over Bernie Sanders' former national co-chair Nina Turner. And she had another data point that shows that this is just not Bernie Sanders' party.
Top House Democrat calling out progressives for targeting moderates. Could so-called woke culture threaten Democrats' chances in the midterms?
The squad has grown in numbers in small part, but they still, the extreme left is still not a huge amount of people in the Democratic caucus.
Okay, so as you see, these days, framing policy differences within the Democratic Party as a civil war of progressives versus moderates is all too common in media coverage of their politics. It's the same reductive framing we saw this week in Ohio's 11th district special election, where Congressional Black Caucus backed Shontel Brown defeated AOC-endorsed Nina Turner. But honestly, is a race between these two black women in a mostly black and solidly blue district really a proxy war for Democratic divides? And does it really tell us anything about how Democrats will do next November? Let's get into it. Joining me now, my friend and nemesis, Dr. Jason Johnson, MSNBC political contributor and professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, and returning champ Eric Boehlert, author and editor at pressrun.media. Love your morning newsletter, Eric. All right. Jason, I want to start with you because I loved your piece that you wrote in the Grio where you kind of talk about this and you make some startling claims. I think Twitter was equally surprised, where you say that really Nina Turner was more establishment candidate and Shontel was not. But before we even really dig into that, though, I got to say, you and I talk about this stuff. Our separate group chats talk about this stuff. When I talk to people outside of our circle, there is never a conversation about, right, this is the establishment. Oh, this is the progressive. But I'm curious your thoughts. Break it down for us.
Right. That's the thing, Tiffany. That's not how regular people talk, right? Regular people don't say, this is a progressive, this is the establishment. I know a lot of regular people who are voters who can't actually tell you what Medicare for all actually is. A lot of these things, It's not because voters are stupid. It's because some of the language that's being used by media elites is not how they look at things. This is what I think is important for everybody to understand. We now in this country have a progressive establishment. That is a good thing. It's like our revolution. It's a lot of the people who came out of the Sanders campaign who are out there pushing for more progressive policies. We saw that this week with the success of Cori Bush in shaming our administration into doing something about the eviction moratorium. So it is good that we have an establishment left now to push the moderates and the conservatives in the party. However, when you're talking about what happened in Ohio, if I told you that there was a candidate that raised twice as much as their opponent, had 3 times as many endorsements, had thousands of out-of-state volunteers, and a 35-point lead 2 months before the election, you assume that person's going to win. And that was the position that Nina Turner was in. And if you blow that kind of lead, that kind of structural lead, that kind of 100% name recognition, you really have to look at yourself and how you blew that 3-to-1 lead rather than automatically complaining that it was some outside force, because that's not really how that plays out. I can't think of another example of somebody blowing a lead that big outside of a scandal.
You just opened a hornet's nest. I can feel my computer smoking from the tweets you're about to get. But Eric, I want to turn to you on this because, look, I think a lot of this is the media framing around this, and you always have such great insight calling out the media and what they can do better. So what's your take on this whole moderate v. progressive fight?
Well, I think Ohio 11, we're in the dog days of summer, right? The political press is kind of scratching around for good stories. And I think the press misses the Trump circus. They miss the bombast, the scandal, the hate tweets and things like that. The press has complained openly that the Biden administration is so boring to cover. So I think Ohio at 11 was a way to kind of gin up some conflict and refight the 2016 Hillary-Bernie Sanders battle. But as pointed out, that's not really what unfolded here. This was, this idea that there was a schism in the party and this was moderate versus liberal. I mean, if it had been a very liberal black woman candidate versus a center-right male white hedge fund Democrat, sure, that's absolutely the narrative. But Shontel Brown's voting record, I predict, will be identical to what Nina Turner's voting record would have been. And so, the press kind of falls back into Dems in disarray. There's always this conflict. There's a schism. The Democratic Party today is probably the most united it's been in modern history. People forget that Barack Obama butted heads with the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton was at war with the Democratic Senate. for much of his 8 years. Today, Democrats are passing key legislation with unanimous votes. So I think it's the press trying to create some drama, trying to create some conflict where it just doesn't really exist.
Yeah, and it's a little frustrating. Jason, you definitely know this. Sometimes it feels like these fights really just live on Twitter. I mean, I get so much of, you're a pawn for the establishment or you're a hardcore Bernie bro. And you guys, it's just dumb. I tell you how I feel every week. Jason tells you how he feels. I'm for the party that empowers the rising majority of this country. People who look like me and people who look like the rising majority. Right. Jason, I declare it lives on Twitter, but do you think this is real life?
No. And what we have to understand, it's not that Twitter is not real life, but Twitter is the whole country. And look, Cliff, Tiffany, you used to live in Cleveland, too. If you go to Huff, if you go to Ohio City, Tremont, Lee Harvard, North Summit County, they're not having conversations about what's happening on Twitter. They're asking, OK, what are you going to do about the potholes on Lee and Harvard? What are you going to do about homeless situations? How are you going to clean up the lake? How are you going to get PPP loans to businesses on the flat so they stay afloat? That's what people were talking about. And I think this is really important because, again, Twitter sometimes brings up these arguments. There's this push out there that Shontel Brown run this race because all sorts of outside evil dark money came in. Let us be clear about that. Number one, outside money comes into campaigns all the time. Number two, it was Nina Turner that decided to nationalize this race by bringing in Killer Mike. We had the interview from James Clyburn saying, hey, look, had they kept my name out their mouth, I would not have come to that area. I would not have gotten involved in the race. I think we have to recognize that when candidates nationalize their races, you bring in outside money. Had the conversation stayed on potholes and local issues, probably Nina Turner would have won because there wouldn't have been any reason or incentive for outside forces to come in and support Shontel Brown.
All right. Well, I don't feel like this conversation is over. So, Jason, we'll continue this on IG Live. Please don't be late.